They invited 300 people to my grandson's birthday party, but somehow, there wasn't room for me. I stood outside the gates and realized that sometimes family leaves you out even when you need them most. Hello there? If you've ever found yourself standing alone while everyone else is celebrating, then you might understand why I'm here, sharing this with you today. My name is Helen, and I am a 67-year-old grandmother with short gray hair and kind blue eyes, living in a quiet suburb in Oregon. I used to think family was everything, that no matter what happened, you could always count on the people you love to stand beside you, to save you a seat, to remember you in the moments that mattered most. But last Saturday, as I stood outside a gate with the sounds of music and laughter spilling out, I realized, sometimes family forgets you, even when you've spent your whole life remembering them. You see, my grandson Ethan turned 6 years old last week. Ethan has sandy blonde hair and the brightest blue eyes you've ever seen, and he loves dinosaurs and rocket ships and running barefoot in the grass. I've watched him since he was a baby, singing to him softly when he had colic, rocking him to sleep when my daughter-in-law Tracy was too exhausted to hold him any longer. Tracy is my son's wife. She's 35, with perfectly styled brown hair and a smile that looks beautiful in pictures, though it doesn't always reach her eyes. My son Daniel is 38, an accountant and a man I raised to be responsible and kind, or at least, I thought I did. Lately, it feels like Tracy's opinions weigh heavier in his decisions than the values I taught him. They decided to throw Ethan a birthday party. Not just any birthday party, but a grand event at a country club, complete with a bouncy castle, a magician, a petting zoo, and a catering service that served tiny sliders and cupcakes with handcrafted dinosaur toppers. Tracy's family was there, her parents, her cousins, her coworkers, all dressed in crisp summer clothes, holding glasses of lemonade, snapping photos for their social media. I received the invitation in the mail, a pastel card with Ethan's smiling face and the words, "You're invited." And so, I put on my blue dress that Ethan once called Princess Blue, wrapped a dinosaur puzzle and a storybook in green paper, and drove over with a smile, excited to see him blow out his candles. But when I arrived, the security guard at the gate looked at me, checked a clipboard, and then shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your name isn't on the list," he said, firm but polite. I tried to explain, "I'm Ethan's grandmother." The guard only repeated that he couldn't let me in. I could hear the sounds of Ethan's laughter floating on the breeze, could see the bright balloons and the parents milling about with their children, and I stood there clutching the wrapped gift, my heart sinking as each moment passed. I called Daniel, my son, expecting him to clear up the mistake, but when he answered, his voice was strained, almost embarrassed. "Mom, it's not a good time. Tracy wanted the guest list to be organized, and there were too many people. We'll celebrate another day." And just like that, I realized that in a party of 300 guests, there was no room for me. I stood there for a long time, my feet aching, the sun beating down, the sound of children's laughter in the distance reminding me of what I was missing. The security guard avoided my eyes, and I eventually turned and walked back to my car. The gift still in my hands, I sat in the driver's seat. The air heavy and tears I didn't expect slid down my cheeks. Not because I missed a party, but because I realized that sometimes people can erase you from the moments that matter most without a second thought. And that day, as I sat alone in my car while the world celebrated my grandson, I decided that I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. After sitting in that car for what felt like forever, I drove home slowly, the wrapped gift for Ethan on the passenger seat, the green paper catching the sunlight, reminding me that I wasn't there to see him open it. The house felt emptier than usual when I returned. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my favorite chair by the window, and tried to swallow the ache in my chest. I watched the neighbors' kids playing with chalk on the sidewalk, their laughter floating up to my porch, and I thought about how I used to take Ethan to the park near my house, letting him climb the jungle gym while I waited with a juice box ready, cheering him on when he mastered the slide by himself. Those moments had felt so normal, like a promise that I would always be part of his life. But life has a way of shifting under your feet without warning. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Ethan's smile in my mind, hearing his little voice saying, "Grandma Helen read me a story." Remembering how he would snuggle close, smelling like baby soap and sunshine, trusting that I was there, that I would always be there. I thought about Tracy, how she would sometimes glance at me with that tight-lipped smile, her eyes flickering when I corrected Ethan's manners or told him a story about Daniel's childhood that she didn't find amusing. And I thought about Daniel, my son, who once cried into my shoulder when he didn't make the varsity team in high school, who I held after he broke his arm, promising him that he was strong enough to heal, that I would always be there. Now he was a grown man standing on the other side of a phone call, telling me there wasn't room for me at my own grandson's party. I spent the next day in quiet, tending to my small garden, watering the pink geraniums Ethan once helped me plant. Each flower felt like a small reminder that life continues to grow even when it feels like it's breaking. As I pulled weeds and trimmed leaves, I found myself whispering, I won't let them erase me. 2 days later, I received a text. From Daniel, thanks for understanding about the party. Ethan had a great time. There was a photo attached to Ethan with frosting on his cheeks, a dinosaur balloon tied to his wrist, grinning. I stared at that photo, tears welling up, both love and hurt battling inside me. I saved the photo, not because I wanted to remember missing that day, but because it was Ethan's face, and I would never let go of that later. My neighbor, Mrs. Green, stopped by. She's 72, with curly white hair and a laugh that fills a room. She brought over a pie like she always does when she senses I need company. Helen, you look like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders, she said, placing a comforting hand on mine. I told her everything from the party to the security guard to the silence of my drive home. She listened, nodding, letting me cry when I needed to. Honey, you've spent your whole life giving to your family, but sometimes people forget the value of what's always been there, she said softly. You're not invisible, even if they try to pretend you are. That evening, after Mrs. Green left, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for a place in my grandson's life. I wasn't going to stand at gates waiting for permission to love him. But I also wasn't going to vanish. The next morning, I took the wrapped gift, the one I had meant to give Ethan, and drove to Daniel's house. I didn't call ahead. When I arrived, I could see Tracy's car in the driveway, and for a moment I almost turned back. But then I remembered Ethan's giggle, the way he'd run into my arms. And I walked up to the porch, gift in hand, and knocked. Tracy opened the door, her face falling when she saw me. Helen, we weren't expecting you, she said, her voice clipped. I know, I said calmly. I came to drop off Ethan's gift. I missed his birthday, and I wanted him to have this. Tracy hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. He's napping right now? Daniel chose to raise him, but I won't disappear from his life because it's more convenient for you. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond. She simply nodded, a tight gesture, and closed the door. I stood there for a moment, letting the ache pass through me, then turned and walked back to my car, the warm breeze catching the hem of my dress. When I got home, I felt something I hadn't felt in days, a quiet strength. I had stood up for myself. I had delivered Ethan's gift, and I had made it clear that I was still here. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was softer than it had been in weeks. Mom, thanks for dropping off the gift. Ethan loved it. He wanted to call and thank you. And then I heard it. The small, sleepy voice of my grandson. Thank you for the dinosaur puzzle, Grandma. I love you. My eyes filled with tears as I replied, I love you too, Ethan. Always. In that moment, I realized that while Tracy might not want me around, Ethan did. And that was enough for me to keep showing up, to keep being present, to remind myself that I was still part of this family. No matter how much others might try to push me away, I thought that call with Ethan would bring some calm back into my days, but families are complicated, aren't they? A few days after the call, Daniel texted me again, saying he and Tracy wanted to talk. That word talk can hold so many unspoken threats when family is involved. I took a deep breath and told him to come by on Saturday. I spent that morning tidying up the living room, fluffing the cushions on the sofa, setting out a plate of shortbread cookies I knew Daniel liked when he was a boy. I even set the good teacups on the coffee table, trying to remind myself that this was my home, my space, and I had the right to feel safe here. They arrived together, Tracy clutching her tote bag like it was a shield, Daniel looking down at his shoes as they stepped inside. The air felt thick with tension, and for a moment I could see the boy in Daniel, the child who once clung to me. After nightmares, now a man caught between his wife's sharp edges and his mother's soft persistence, we sat down, and there was silence, the clock ticking loudly on the wall behind me. I took a sip of tea, forcing my hands to stay steady. Tracy cleared her throat first. Helen, we appreciate you bringing Ethan's gift, but we need to talk about boundaries. There it was, the word that made my stomach drop. Boundaries, I set my cup down gently, folding my hands in my lap. All right, let's talk. Tracy glanced at Daniel, urging him to speak, but he avoided my eyes, so she continued. We feel that it would be better if visits with Ethan were scheduled in advance and only when it's convenient for us. We're trying to keep his routine consistent. I nodded, letting her words settle, feeling their weight, but also recognizing what was underneath them. Control, fear, the discomfort of having another voice, another influence in Ethan's life. I understand routines, I said softly, but I also want to be a part of his life. I don't want to be someone who just drops off gifts on porches. Tracy's jaw tightened. We're not saying you can't see him. We're just saying we need to manage it. I looked over at Daniel then, really looked at him, seeing the hesitation in his eyes, the way he swallowed hard before finally speaking. Mom, we need things to be calm. Tracy thinks it's confusing for Ethan when there's too many people around. I felt the sting of those words, but I refused to let them harden me. Daniel, I'm not too many people. I'm your mother. I'm Ethan's grandmother. Tracy's lips pressed into a thin line. Helen, we're his parents. We decide what's best. There it was again. The unspoken belief that I had no place unless they allowed it. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath, letting the calm I'd worked so hard to build wash over me. Tracy, I respect that you're his parents. I respect your role, but I won't be erased from Ethan's life. I won't be treated like a stranger. Silence settled in the room, heavy and unyielding. I saw Daniel's shoulders sag, the weight of this conversation pressing on him. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice steady. All I ask is to see my grandson, to read him stories, to take him to the park sometimes, to be there for him like I was there for you, Daniel. Daniel finally met my eyes, and for a flicker of a moment I saw the young man who once trusted me with everything. He nodded slowly. Okay, Mom, we can figure something out. Tracy's eyes flashed, but she said nothing, pressing her lips. Together and looking away, they left not long after with the promise that I could see Ethan next weekend for a few hours. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I watched them drive away, the street quiet again, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Later that evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with pink and lavender, I took out a box of old photo albums. I found pictures of Daniel as a child, playing with his toy trucks, riding on my hip, laughing with his missing front teeth. I found pictures of Ethan as a baby, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, his wide blue eyes looking up at me like I was his whole world. I pressed a hand to my chest, letting the warmth of those memories remind me why I was fighting so hard to stay in his life. This wasn't about control or pride, it was about love. It was about refusing to become invisible in the lives of people I love with every fiber of my being. The next morning, I woke up with purpose. I called the library and asked if they still held weekly children's storytime sessions. They did. I marked the date on my calendar, planning to take Ethan one day. I called the local park district, asking about the children's summer program. Schedule, imagining days spent with Ethan feeding ducks, pushing him on the swings, letting him know that no matter how small the window of time I was given, I would use it to be there for him, because that's what grandmothers do. We love, even when it's hard. We show up, even when we're told to step back. We give, even when it hurts. And as I folded away the memories and tidied up the living room that evening, I realized that my story wasn't over. This chapter was just beginning, and I was ready to live it fully. One moment, one visit, one story at a time. I wish I could tell you that the next visit with Ethan was easy, that I walked into their house and was greeted with open arms and warm smiles, but life rarely hands us the perfect moment, does it? That Saturday, I arrived at Daniel and Tracy's house with a book bag over my shoulder, filled with Ethan's favorite stories, stickers, and a small wooden puzzle I'd found at the farmer's market. I stood at their door, taking a deep breath before knocking, reminding myself that I had every right to be here. I was not an intruder in my own family. Tracy opened the door, her smile tight, her eyes glancing back into the house before meeting mine. Hi, Helen. Hello, Tracy, I replied, keeping my voice warm. Is Ethan ready? She stepped aside, letting me in without a word. I noticed how she hovered by the doorway, like a guard posted on duty. Ethan came running down the hall, his little arms flailing with excitement. Nana, he shouted, his cheeks flushed with happiness, his blue eyes sparkling just like Daniel's used to when he was Ethan's age. That moment, that single word, was worth every ounce of discomfort I had felt. I knelt down, opening my arms, and he ran straight into them, hugging me tightly, burying his face into my shoulder. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of child shampoo and peanut butter, letting that hug remind me why I was fighting for this. We settled in the living room, and Ethan immediately asked if I would read him a story. I pulled out the little engine that could, one of Daniel's favorites from when he was small. As I read, Ethan's small hand gripped my sleeve, his eyes following the pictures, his laughter ringing through the room every time I made the choo-choo sound. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tracy watching from the kitchen, arms crossed, lips pressed together. She didn't say a word, but her presence was a constant reminder that I was being evaluated, that every moment was being measured. After reading, Ethan pulled me toward the backyard, wanting to show me his new sandbox. I followed, my knees creaking, as I lowered myself to sit on the edge while he dug tunnels and built tiny mountains, chattering about everything and nothing, his words tumbling over each other in excitement. Double quotes, Nana, can you come to my birthday next week? He asked suddenly, his eyes wide with hope. I paused, looking into those clear blue eyes, a pang of fear tightening in my chest. I would love to, sweetheart. We'll see what your mommy and daddy say. Okay. He nodded, returning to his digging, unaware of the storm those words would bring when it was time to leave. I hugged him tightly, pressing a kiss to his forehead, whispering, I love you so much, Ethan. I love you too, Nana, he whispered back. And I carried those words home with me, letting them fill the quiet of my house when I returned the next day. My phone rang and Tracy's name flashed on the screen. I answered, bracing myself. Helen? We need to talk about the party, Tracy began, her voice sharp. We're keeping it small, family only, and it's going to be at the clubhouse. We don't want to overwhelm Ethan. Tracy, I said softly. I am family. There was silence on the other end, the kind that makes your heart pound. Then she spoke, her words careful, cold. Helen, you can come for an hour, but we need you to understand that we don't want you bringing gifts that will clutter up the house, and we don't want you making a scene. A scene? I echoed, stunned. You know what I mean? She snapped. We just want things to go smoothly. I took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the counter. I will come for Ethan. I won't be there for you, Tracy. I'll be there because my grandson asked me to be. She hung up without another word that week. I found a small wooden train set at a local toy shop, one that I knew Ethan would love. I wrapped it carefully, tying it with a blue ribbon, and placed it in the corner of my living room, ready for the day of the party. On the morning of the party, I dressed in a soft lavender blouse, the one Daniel had once said brought out the color in my eyes, and I pinned on a simple brooch, a small token of courage. As I drove to the clubhouse, my hands trembled on the steering wheel, but my resolve was steady. When I arrived, the parking lot was full and I saw dozens of cars, balloons, tied to the clubhouse railing, children running in the grassy area, laughter ringing out in the morning air. My heart clenched at the sight. Realizing just how many people had been invited, I approached the door, holding the small gift, and as I stepped inside, I was met by a wall of noise and color. 300 guests. It felt like in every corner spilling onto the patio, music blasting, children squealing, and then I saw Ethan, in the middle of it all, wearing a paper crown, his cheeks pink, his eyes searching the room. When he spotted me, his face lit up, and he shouted, Nana, before running toward me, weaving through the crowd, throwing himself into my arms. That moment, with my grandson's arms around my neck, was all I needed to remember why I was there, why I would always be there, no matter how hard it became. And so, as Tracy watched from across the room, her arms crossed, her eyes cold, I lifted Ethan into my arms, kissed his cheek, and whispered, Happy birthday, my sweet boy. Because no matter what they said, no matter how hard they tried to push me away, I would never stop showing up for him. When I left that clubhouse with Ethan's frosting sticky hug still warm on my shoulder, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would get better. Maybe seeing me there, quietly present, not making a scene, would soften Tracy's heart, or at least help her see that I wasn't there to steal attention, but to love my grandson. But hope can be a heavy thing when you're the only one carrying it. 3 days after the party, I received a message in the family group chat Tracy managed. It was brief, her words clipped. Helen, moving forward, we'd appreciate it if you could check with us before bringing any gifts or visiting. It's important for Ethan to have structure, and we need to manage his schedule carefully. I read the message 3 times, my eyes blurring, a quiet ache blooming in my chest. I wanted to scream, to call her, and remind her how Ethan had looked for me in that crowd, how his face had lit up, how he clung to me when it was time for cake. But instead, I closed my phone, setting it on the table, and went to make myself a cup of tea. It's what I do when I need to think, when the hurt is too loud to face all at once. Later that day, Daniel called, his voice low, tired. Mom, you know how Tracy is. She just wants to keep things organized. Organized, I repeated quietly. Daniel, I am his grandmother. I know, Mom, he sighed, but it's hard for Tracy. She didn't grow up with family around, and big gatherings stress her out. She thinks it's too much for Ethan, but it's not too much for Ethan, I replied. It's too much for her. He was silent, and I could hear the discomfort in his breathing. Mom, please, just let us handle it. It hurt, that conversation. The way he spoke, as if I was the problem that needed managing, as if my presence was something to be controlled instead of welcomed. That night, I sat by my window, looking out at the quiet street, the lamplight pooling on the pavement, and I let myself cry. Not just for me, but for Ethan, who was being taught that love could be rationed. That family came with conditions, but when the tears dried, something inside me hardened, not in anger, But in resolve, the next Saturday, I called ahead as they asked if I could take Ethan to the park for an hour. I held my breath as I waited for Tracy's answer. She agreed, but only if I picked him up at the end of the driveway and brought him back exactly on time. I agreed, even though it felt like signing a contract to visit my own family when I arrived. Ethan came running down the walkway, clutching a small paper airplane, his smile wide. I buckled him into his car seat, and as I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see him grinning. Waving the airplane around, we spent that hour at the park. Under the wide blue California sky, with the breeze rustling the trees and Ethan's laughter ringing out as he ran between the swings and the slide. I pushed him gently, counting softly each time he swung forward, his small feet kicking at the air. Double quotes, Nana, higher. He giggled. I laughed, pushing him a little higher, his hair fluttering in the breeze, his eyes closed in joy. When we sat on the bench to eat the peanut butter sandwiches I'd packed, he leaned against me, resting his head on my arm, and whispered, "I like when it's just us, Nana." And I realized in that moment that all the rules, the tension, the discomfort, all faded away when it was just the two of us. That, in these small, quiet moments, we were building something no one could take from us. Before returning him home, we stopped by a small flower stand. I let him pick out a sunflower, its bright petals like a burst of sunlight in his hands. When we pulled up to the house, Tracy was waiting by the door, arms crossed, her eyes scanning us as we walked up. "Hi, Mommy," Ethan shouted, holding up the sunflower. "Look what Nana got me." Tracy's eyes softened for just a moment as she took the flower from him, and I saw a flicker of gratitude there, quickly replaced by her usual guarded expression. "Thank you, Helen," she said, her voice flat but polite. "You're welcome," I replied. Meeting her eyes steadily as I walked back to my car, I glanced back to see Ethan waving from the doorway, the sunflower in his hand, his smile wide and true. Driving home, I felt a quiet peace settle in my chest. This was how I would fight for my place in Ethan's life, not with anger or arguments, but with quiet, consistent love. With 1 hour in the park, one peanut butter sandwich, one sunflower at a time? Because family isn't built on grand gestures or loud declarations. It's built on showing up again and again, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. And I would keep showing up for Ethan, no matter what. A few weeks after that park visit, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Carefully, I opened it, and a folded piece of construction paper fell into my lap. On the front, in crayon letters, it said, "For Nana." Inside was a drawing of 2 stick figures under a bright yellow sun, holding hands beside a wobbly tree. All the tension, the guarded conversations, the careful requests to call first, faded into the background as I traced the uneven lines with my fingertips. I picked up the phone and called Daniel. "Tell Ethan thank you for the card," I said softly. It made my day. There was a pause, and Daniel's voice cracked. "He misses you, Mom. He asks about you every day." "I miss him too," I whispered, after that call. I started writing small notes to Ethan, just a few lines tucked into envelopes with stickers of dinosaurs or stars. I told him stories about the butterflies in my garden, the blue jays that came to my feeder, the way the sunset painted the sky pink and gold in the evenings. Little notes of love with no conditions, no expectations, just reminders that I was thinking of him and Tracy. Before bedtime, his small voice on the phone, telling me about his day, about school, about a book he liked, became the highlight of my evenings. "Good night, Nana. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart." On eggshells, trying to keep things balanced so I wouldn't lose even this small connection, but I realized that love isn't about how much time we get, but about how we use the time we have. One Saturday, Tracy called unexpectedly. "Hi, Helen," she began, her voice cautious. "Project, he's been asking if you can come." I blinked in surprise, my hand tightening around the phone. "Of course," I replied carefully. "I'd love to." When I arrived, I brought a small plate of cookies, still warm, and Ethan's eyes lit up the moment he saw me. Double quotes, "Nana, you're here." He grabbed my hand, pulling me toward a table where he had a cardboard volcano set up. "Watch this." He giggled, pouring a small cup of vinegar into the baking soda, watching with delight as the lava fizzed and bubbled over the edges. Tracy stood nearby, holding her phone, recording Ethan's excitement. She glanced at me, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled a real small, tired but genuine smile. "Thank you for coming, Helen," she said quietly. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. That afternoon we shared cookies and laughter. I watched Ethan run around the yard with his friends, his laughter ringing like a bell, and I felt something ease inside me. I wasn't here to reclaim old traditions, or I was here for Ethan, for moments like these, where love showed itself in the simplest ways: a hand to hold, a smile, a plate of warm cookies, a quiet presence that said, "I am here, and I will always be here." As the sun began to set, I hugged Ethan goodbye, pressing a soft kiss to the top of his head. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." "I love you, Nana," he whispered, his arms tight around my waist. Driving home, the sky painted in soft pastels, I realized that even though the world often tells older women like me to step aside, we are still here. Our love is still needed. Our wisdom still matters. Our presence is still a gift, and no one can take that from us. Later that week, I framed Ethan's drawing and placed it on the mantel above my fireplace. Each time I pass it, I remember that day in the park, that day at the volcano project, and the countless small moments that made this bond strong. This journey hasn't been easy. Not being included the way I once was, but through it all, I chose to keep showing up with love, even if it meant doing it quietly. Without the big family gatherings I once dreamed of, I learned that being a grandmother isn't about how many parties you're invited to or how often you're included in family photos. It's about the love you give, the quiet strength you hold, and the legacy of kindness and presence you leave behind in your grandchildren's hearts. To those of you listening, if you've ever felt pushed aside, if you've ever been told there's no place for you, please remember this. Your love matters. Your presence matters. You matter. Show up even when it's hard. Love quietly, persistently, and without expectation of applause. Because someday your grandchild will remember who was there, who made them feel safe, who loved them without conditions. And that will be your legacy. I hope my story has given you hope or strength, or simply reminded you that you are not alone. If you've ever faced something similar, please share your story below. Let's remind each other that our love is powerful, that we deserve to be seen, and that our place in this world, especially in our families' lives, is something worth protecting. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. I'm leaving 2 other stories on the screen that you might find comforting and inspiring as you continue your day. Take care of yourself and remember, your love makes a difference.